Picture this, you've just been crowned queen, and before you even take a breath, the celebration becomes a trap. The bells, the cheers, the golden crown pressing into your skull, none of it means safety. It means your life now belongs to someone else. Fairy tales lied. Becoming the king's wife wasn't a reward. It was the doorway into a shining nightmare, one that could easily end with your head hitting the stone floor of your own palace. This is the real world of royal marriages, where "until death do us part" wasn't romantic, it was literal. Today, you'll learn what it actually meant to hold the highest title a woman could have, and why that very title turned into a death sentence for so many. Prepare yourself, because we're stepping into the coldest, darkest corners of actual history, where affection was rare and survival required strategy, obedience, and silence. If you ever thought queens lived charmed lives, this story will rip that illusion apart. Before we begin, help this channel grow by liking and subscribing. It keeps these stories alive. Let's start with something that cuts straight to the bone. Royal wives were treated like high-priced human assets. From the second you were born into a royal bloodline, your destiny was already auctioned off. Age didn't matter. 5 years old or 15, your father was already discussing your market value with foreign kingdoms. And yes, value meant exactly what it sounds like. Take Margaret of Anjou. She was promised to Henry VI of England at just 6 years old. Her father, René of Anjou, essentially traded her for a political deal that never even happened. Margaret grew up painfully aware that her entire importance centered on her body and her ability to produce a male heir. And here's where the horror truly starts. When she finally arrived in England, she discovered her husband was mentally unstable, and she was expected to govern a collapsing kingdom during a civil war while pretending everything was normal. If that shocks you, brace yourself. Princess marriage contracts contained terms so harsh they made slave agreements look generous. Parents negotiated everything: how many children the girl was expected to deliver, what punishments awaited her if she failed, and what conditions justified sending her back like spoiled goods. Catherine of Aragon is a perfect example. When she was betrothed to Prince Arthur, the marriage treaty stated that if she didn't give birth to a male heir within 3 years, she could be returned to Spain as defective merchandise. Imagine being 15 and knowing your entire self-worth was calculated by your reproductive success. And the cruelty didn't stop there. When Arthur died and she married his brother, Henry VIII, her inability to give him a son became the excuse he needed to obliterate her life completely. But that was only Act 1. Once you stepped into your new kingdom, the psychological torment began. And if you think queens held real power, here's the reality check. Queens were luxury prisoners. Every movement watched, every conversation monitored, every decision approved or denied by the king or his council. Privacy didn't exist. Even your bodily functions were inspected by ladies stationed specifically to report on you. Mary Stuart of Scotland lived this hell in real time. After marrying her cousin, Lord Darnley, she discovered he had filled her residence with spies. She couldn't speak with advisors without him finding out. She couldn't read or send letters without him intercepting them. She couldn't govern her own country unless he allowed it. The control was so extreme that Darnley murdered her private secretary, David Rizzio, in front of her simply because he suspected an inappropriate relationship. And here's the sickening twist. Once Mary began plotting her escape, Darnley accused her of treason. A woman crowned Queen of Scotland couldn't even choose who to talk to inside her own palace. And no, this wasn't unusual. The system of ladies-in-waiting was essentially royal surveillance disguised as companionship. These women didn't just serve the queen, they reported on her. They tracked her moods, her menstrual cycle, her personal conversations, even her nightmares, because they slept in the same room. This happened brutally to Catherine de' Medici when she married Henry II of France. Her ladies-in-waiting sent information straight to Diane de Poitiers, the king's official mistress, who used it to humiliate Catherine again and again. Imagine knowing that your private pain was being delivered as court entertainment. But psychological warfare was just the beginning. The main event was physical violence, normalized, accepted, and described as marital correction. And this wasn't mild abuse. Queens endured beatings that shattered bones, knocked out teeth, and left scars they carried to the grave. Henry VIII didn't just execute 2 of his wives, he abused all of them. Anne Boleyn hid bruises beneath long sleeves, marks from the discipline sessions Henry believed were necessary to control her. Catherine Howard, his 5th wife, reached her execution with so many injuries from beatings that even the executioners pitied her. And here's the part that will make your stomach turn. The court viewed this brutality as standard. Beating the Queen was seen as a legitimate administrative skill. Courtiers even congratulated kings for keeping order. Ivan the Terrible in Russia pushed this cruelty beyond imagination. He didn't simply beat his wives, he tortured them in ways that would horrify even modern interrogators. Ivan the Terrible's brutality toward his wives went far beyond ordinary abuse. His first wife, Anastasia Romanovna, was officially said to have died from sickness, but contemporary accounts reveal fractures all over her body, the kind of injuries that only come from long-term torture. His second wife, Maria Temryukovna, was discovered dead with clear signs of strangulation. Ivan brushed it off by claiming it happened accidentally in a moment of passion. The most horrifying part, whenever these women tried to seek help or defend themselves, they were charged with treason. In the moral framework of the time, a wife resisting her husband was viewed as rebelling against God's order, and rebellion against divine authority counted as heresy, a crime punishable by death. But now we have to move into territory even darker than physical violence, pregnancy. Because for queens, becoming pregnant was not a blessing. It was a gamble with death. Childbearing for royal women was essentially biological Russian roulette. Most queens lived in a constant state of dread, fully aware that every pregnancy might kill them. The mortality rate was astonishingly high, and not due to poverty, but because royal physicians were glorified quacks who practiced medicine like ritual magic rather than science. The story of Jane Seymour, 3rd wife of Henry VIII, captures this horror perfectly. When she went into labour, the king's doctors made a prioritization choice that still chills historians. The baby mattered more than the mother. They cut her open alive, without any form of anaesthesia, just to deliver the future Edward VI. Jane lived long enough to hold her son, then spent 12 days dying from infection while the court congratulated themselves for securing a male heir. And here's the most disturbing truth: this was not a tragic mistake. It was intentional. Henry VIII had explicitly ordered his doctors to save the child over the mother if complications arose. Jane Seymour was essentially sacrificed for the continuation of the dynasty, and her case wasn't unique. Royal birth protocols included specialized tools built for one purpose: extracting the heir even if it meant destroying the mother. Hooks, blades, and iron forceps were designed to rip the child free if the labor stalled. In other words, instruments created not to preserve women, but to preserve succession. Mary de Medici, wife of Henry IV of France, survived 6 pregnancies, but each left her more shattered than the last. Records show that by her 5th delivery, she could hardly walk without aid because of severe internal injuries. Her 6th childbirth partially paralyzed her, yet the event was celebrated because another son had been born. And the cruelty still didn't end there. A queen who failed to produce sons was labelled defective, replaceable, divorceable, exilable, or even executable. Even losing a child placed blame entirely on the mother for failing the succession. Anne of Cleves, Henry VIII's 4th wife, was the rare exception. She lived because Henry thought she was so unattractive that he refused to sleep with her. Ironically, being dismissed as undesirable spared her from the lethal childbirth expectations that destroyed the others. Now we approach one of the darkest elements of this narrative, the executions. When a king decided his queen had failed, he didn't settle for quiet separation. He needed a public demonstration, a spectacle designed to terrify every woman in the realm. Anne Boleyn's execution in 1536 wasn't simple murder. It was a staged event meant to crush her spirit and warn every noblewoman watching. Henry VIII didn't just want her dead, he wanted her destroyed. The accusations against her were so absurd that even people at the time recognized them as fabrications: adultery with multiple men, including her own brother, treason, and sorcery. Her real crime was failing to provide Henry with a son. Worse, she dared to contradict him in front of others. And here comes the part that will break you. Anne realized her death was coming weeks before the execution. Henry had already begun openly pursuing Jane Seymour. Anne understood exactly what that meant. In her final days, she wrote letters to her daughter Elizabeth, pleading with her to obey men, avoid confrontation, and never repeat her mother's mistakes. On execution day, Anne was forced to walk to the scaffold dressed in grey, the colour of mourning, while the crowd hurled insults, calling her a witch and a whore. Then came the final humiliation. She was required to give a speech, praising Henry as a noble and gracious king. Imagine being ordered to publicly compliment the man orchestrating your death. And Catherine Howard, Henry's fifth wife, suffered an even more degrading fate. Accused of adultery at just 19, she was treated as a manipulative seductress despite having been abused by older men since she was a child. Henry even changed the law so he could execute a queen for alleged premarital indiscretions. Catherine was so terrified on the day of her death that she could not stand. They had to carry her to the block on a stretcher. Her final words, "I pray for the king's soul," were lines drilled into her under threat. And not every queen died in public. Some were poisoned, some drowned under mysterious circumstances. Others simply vanished. Mary Stuart, Mary, Queen of Scots, was kept in captivity for 18 years by her cousin, Elizabeth I, before being formally executed. Mary Stuart's final years were not simply imprisonment. They were psychological warfare designed to break her long before the executioner ever touched his axe. For 18 years, she was interrogated endlessly, cut off from her children, and kept in living conditions meant to slowly destroy her body. By the time the Crown finally ordered her death, Mary was so physically frail she needed help climbing onto the scaffold. Her executioner, shaking with fear at the idea of killing a queen, needed 3 full swings to sever her head. The crowd watched each failed blow in horrified silence. And here is the truly chilling part. These executions were never secret. They were staged as public lessons. Ordinary families brought their children so they could see firsthand what happened to any woman who dared step outside the boundaries set by men. And now we reach perhaps the darkest chapter of all, the queens who survived and the brutal compromises they made to stay alive. Their survival wasn't luck. It required sacrificing dignity, compassion, and sometimes other women. Catherine de' Medici mastered this terrible art better than anyone. To remain Queen Mother in France, she molded herself into what her enemies called the most dangerous woman in Europe. But the truth no one wants to acknowledge is simple. She didn't start out ruthless. The system forced her to choose between becoming a predator or becoming a corpse. Catherine used assassins, manipulated civil wars, and relied on poison as a political strategy. Every ruthless act she committed was designed to protect her children and hold her position because she knew even one moment of vulnerability meant annihilation. The infamous poisoned perfume story was more legend than fact, but her real network of spies and killers rivaled any modern intelligence agency. The tragedy is that Catherine fully understood the cost of her survival. In a letter to her daughter Elizabeth, she confessed, "I have done things that will damn my name forever, but I did them so that you would never have to." Imagine living with the knowledge that survival required becoming the opposite of everything you once believed in. Elizabeth I of England chose a different, but equally brutal solution. She refused to marry at all. She understood that the moment she took a husband, her freedom would vanish and her life could be dictated or ended by a man. But that choice condemned her to crushing isolation. Every relationship, every friendship, every moment of trust had to be evaluated through political risk. Elizabeth ordered the death of Mary Stuart, not out of personal hatred, but because she knew powerful men would forever use Mary's existence as a weapon against her rule. The letter Elizabeth wrote after signing Mary's death warrant exposes the torment behind her political mask. "I have signed away the life of my own blood, and with it, the life of my own soul. And then there is the most heartbreaking case of all, Joanna of Castile, known to history as Juana la Loca. But Joanna was never insane, she was cornered. When her husband, Philip the Handsome, died, she refused to bury him because it was the only leverage she had left. Without Philip's presence, the Castilian nobles would treat her as a powerless widow they could manipulate or remove entirely. Her refusal to let go of his body was not madness, it was resistance. Her father, and later her son, exploited this so-called madness to imprison her for 46 years. Nearly half a century locked away, not because she was dangerous, but because it was politically convenient for the men in her life. Records from that era show Joanna was perfectly rational, but she had learned that pretending to be unstable was the only way to avoid being forced into another political marriage. Her insanity was not a mental collapse, it was a survival tactic. And this brings us to the most devastating truth embedded in all these stories. These queens weren't helpless victims. They were fighters trapped inside a system that offered them only two choices: adapt or die. Their weapons were limited: intellect, endurance, manipulation, and, when cornered, cruelty. But the cost of staying alive was becoming twisted versions of who they once were. Catherine de' Medici, once a girl who wrote poetry about peace, ended up engineering massacres. Elizabeth I, who dreamed of a loving family in her youth, died alone, surrounded by advisors who feared her far more than they admired her. Joanna, one of the most educated and cultured women of her generation, became a historical symbol of female madness, even though she was one of the sanest. So this is the real face of royal marriage, a system that treated the most powerful women on earth like decorated livestock, where affection was rare and where survival demanded unimaginable sacrifices. These were not fairy tale princesses. They were real women trapped in a world where their worth was measured in male heirs and where a single misstep could lead to torture, exile, or execution. The next time you see a crown behind glass in a museum, remember, it wasn't just an ornament. It was a weight carried by women who lived in constant fear, women who were beaten, silenced, betrayed, and slaughtered by men who swore to love them. Behind every Her Majesty was a human being lying awake at night, wondering if she would survive until morning. And now, after walking through this nightmare of history, I'm going to take one moment to appreciate something simple, that today we can choose who we marry, we can leave a marriage that harms us, and no one can legally execute a woman for failing to produce a son. After seeing what queens once endured, it's hard not to feel grateful to live in an era where being a woman is no longer automatically a death sentence.